The food service, hospitality, and retail industries are evolving in ways you've never heard of until now. Hosted by global industry technovator Rob Grimes and powered by the IFBTA, TechBytes is your go-to podcast, putting technology innovation and trends on the menu.
Welcome back to another episode of the TechBytes podcast powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host. And this week's an interesting week because once again, we're in Singapore at the NRF-Asia conference. And I'm very excited to have a number of conversations here and also to have been able to cover the show floor here and look at that crossover between food service, hospitality, and retail technology. But this afternoon, I have a very special guest with me for a conversation, of course, and that is Martine Reardon, who is the head of content and retail strategy for the National Retail Federation. So welcome to TechBytes.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's just start out with this. You know, it's always great to have a conversation with somebody who actually comes from operations. And so you're not one of the long-term people who sit up on Capitol Hill and you do the lobby and things like that.
No,
you're coming from a background of retail.
Yes.
So 32 years with Macy's?
32 years with Macy's.
And always in?
Always in marketing. Marketing and events and consumer insights and research and branding, you name it. I basically ran the brand.
So were you the voice of Macy's?
I was the voice of Macy's.
Or the person behind the curtain?
Both. A little bit of both. So I was out there quite a lot, speaking engagements on television quite a bit, produced television shows for Macy's. The person behind the curtain also in the background of the big branding television campaigns with many of the major stars from Taylor Swift to Justin Bieber to Beyonce. And so I played both roles.
Okay. So somehow you made a leap from working as a retailer, providing the messaging, to doing the messaging of the industry. So how does that work? And the strategy of the industry?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to spend a marvelous career of 32 years at Macy's and decided that I needed to slow down and retire a bit and travel and do all the wonderful things that I hadn't done in 32 years. I'd ran 25 parades and 25 fireworks shows and flower shows. And
how come I didn't know you when my kids were like growing up? When we should have been doing the Macy's parade. I'm like totally.
Believe me,
Macy's,
I
right?
was everybody's best friend back then because yes, I did run the Macy's parade. So it was a great deal of fun. And oftentimes I would be out speaking publicly and I would say, foolish me would say, I should be paying Terry Lundgren for allowing me to have this job because it was the greatest job in the world. But it was also very tiring. And so it came to a point where I wanted to step back and think about my life a little bit differently. I wanted to travel. I wanted to come to Singapore, but I would never have had that opportunity because retail, you spend a great deal of your time working. And if you're not physically working, you're reading or you're catching up or you're curious about another piece of an industry. So you're always doing something that prevents you from traveling as much. So I retired, and Matt Shea, who is the president and CEO of the National Retail Federation, was a very good friend. I met him through Macy's was a very large member, a very active member of the National
And they were your
Retail
voice,
Federation.
for the industry, obviously, right?
Exactly. And so when I retired, Matt said, hey, we could really use some help with having a true practitioner, a retail practitioner, advising us on what's really going on in the industry and what's it like being in a store or in a market and dealing with the consumer directly. And digital was really explosive then. And it was really about, at one point, it was a digital versus a store. And we, Macy's, never believed that.
Well, let me just make sure I understand that because I was going to ask you this question about just because a person's in marketing and being a voice doesn't mean that they actually know the technology and the digital side because there may be somebody else that's doing that, right? So how did you, you were involved in that end as well, the actual delivery of the end piece.
So I'll tell you how that worked. So Years ago, you're right. I wouldn't have been involved in the technology because every company has a chief technology officer. But in our case, what we started to see was this seismic shift of marketing and technology really sort of coming together and collaborating very much, because the way you were going to reach your consumers through some technological device, mobile being the first one, that you'd have that direct relationship for a consumer. So for a marketer not to understand technology and not to understand even how the digital and the e-commerce piece worked,
but if I do my timing right here, and I think about e-commerce in the Macy's world when you left, so that was 6 years ago, 7 years ago?
7 years ago.
7 years ago. Okay, so I am sure that it was not what it is today with the online e-commerce as it is today, taking up so much of retail in general.
Well, I would say that the seismic shift was the pandemic, right? So, but when I was at Macy's, I had the e-commerce business as well. And we had grown it from a couple $100 million business to a $1 billion business. And I won't tell you exactly what that number was, but exponentially it grew. And then what happened was the pandemic hit. And because people could not go to physical stores or did not want to go to physical stores, the digital commerce piece of it even went further.
Yeah, by the way, then you have to learn supply chain as well and other things you might not have had to have learned in the digital side of e-commerce.
So if you were somebody in a marketing job who is responsible for profitable growth and profitable sales, you needed to know so many things about the technology world. I will say to you that I can tell time. I don't know how to build the clock. I don't know how to put the plumbing together for the technology, but I certainly know how to use technology to help get a message out further, to reach a consumer in a certain place, which whatever way they want to be spoken to, whether it's through a mobile device, whether it's through, just going straight to a web browser, whether it's you want to come into the store and physically speak to somebody, whether you want to have a chatbot. So I know enough to make me dangerous, but I work with the right partners who can build things for me to get that.
So I know, we're just getting to know each other now, but my background is as a restaurant manager who happened to end up in technology. And in Washington, Roy Rogers and Bob's Big Boy. I have a Bob's Big Boy in my office, a 7-foot one. But that's my background. And somehow I ended up with Marriott going into technology. But, today, you've actually cued in on something that what you were doing is you're an operations person, in it because you were in touch with the operations and the consumer, because obviously they had to be connected here certainly in a retail store. And then you're able to translate what you need into the technology side of it, and how you deliver, but internally and externally, that piece. So that probably gave you, obviously, being one of the largest, retailers in the world, you had to be knowing what the trends were going to be.
Yes.
And so you also strategy. The one comment I was going to make earlier is it's very fascinating to me when you talked about your role of working side by side with the technology officer, that how many, even the person you interviewed this morning, Christopher Thomas Moore from Domino's, there are chief technology officers, there's chief marketing officers, there's chief information officers, and there's chief digital officers. And the number of companies I know now that the in term is the chief digital officer is actually the head of IT, and there may or may not be a CTO or CIO. Well, that's where you actually were bringing those things together.
Yes. And in some cases, it's a chief marketing officer, or what they'll call now a chief customer officer, or the chief experience officer, who has all of those that sit underneath them. And as a matter of fact, we are doing a conference, the NRF, which is one of the things that I started to bring together around this strategic point of digital, e-commerce, and marketing all collaborating together and not sitting in a silo anymore.
And you need everybody seated at the table together.
And you need everyone to own a piece of it and have all the same vested interest in it, all looking towards one goal. They were very, very siloed before. Now it's about bringing them all together. So a conference that the NRF is doing next month in July in Southern California is called Nexus. And
Right.
it's about bringing those three disciplines together to think about the future. So where is the future of the MarTech stack is what we call
What
it.
I find interesting, though, in that is that, and everybody has silos in there. Now, the NRF is a little bit different to me because it's a federation, well, by name, but it has different groups in it. But I remember when they had the restaurant group in there. Was it ECR? I forget what it was, but the CCCR, right? NCCR, right?
Yes.
National Chain Restaurant. Right. Okay.
Right.
Council. So in reality, retail, if you look at the broadest definition, covers everything, even though there are silos in convenience stores and there's silos in food stores and everything. But yet you really have to cover a very large constituency, and it is a global one as well. So what would be interesting, I always find this interesting, why we did the Food Service Innovation Zone at NRF 24 and we'll do it in 25, is because to bring together the different areas, including restaurants and food service and even hotels, because there's retail and hotels, right? Micro markets, right? Sure. So bring them all together. Be interesting to see them included in some of the conferences that you're working on, because the subjects are of great interest, but people never seem to reach across the you're working at trade association, but reach across the aisle and, to learn from the other industries.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing, particularly for some of the events that the NRF is doing, is we are trying to sort of go back into all the industries and see how does this all work, because it all is so relatable. If you think about retail stores, so Macy's, we sold clothing and jewelry and home products and children's products. But we got smart and said, if you really want to attract more consumers and you want to develop stickiness with that customer, let's bring some of those favorite brands that into the store, like a Starbucks, like a Roy Rogers, like a McDonald's. And so food and shopping go together. So these industries, for me, really do work together, just like a technology.
Can we say Fortnum and Mason? Can we say, Harrods? Can we say food courts? They are, well, okay, so we don't need to talk about Walmart being one of the largest grocery store companies or pharmacy companies, right, but started as a retailer out there. But as we talk about, as you travel the world, and we are sitting here in Singapore, you see these retail giants that for years were in the restaurant business, the food business, the grocery business. But we were a little bit slower to adopt, some of those things, in the U.S. But I am curious about this. So now you're responsible for a number of events and the content, and now you have sort of, you worked at Macy's. I'm thinking like the shoe on the other foot. I don't know how the shoe department was there, but
it was fabulous.
It was fabulous. Okay, very good. Well, listen, let's just take a break for a moment. I need to catch my breath here, so we'll come back in just a minute.
With the rapid expansion of technology in the food and beverage industries, finding the right supplier can become overwhelming and complicated. To simplify this process, the IFBTA created Exchange. Exchange is a powerful search tool where users can easily narrow down their technology search and refine results by application type, geography served, department, and more. Browse resources and learn more about the industry's technology suppliers at exchange.ifbta.org. Now, back to the show.
So, in any event, now you need to figure out what the industry needs to hear and talk about. And also because of the virtual retailing and all of that, you have a lot of new startups that come up that weren't before. So how do you keep your finger on the pulse of this digital world? Because that's why Matt brought you in.
Yeah.
So how do you do that and then decide what the content is going to be at Nexus or at the NRF show or here in Asia? How do you do that?
So I think, just by the session that you saw this morning with Christopher Thomas Moore, you really associate yourself with people and brands that you admire for what they're doing with innovation. And I've admired what Domino's has done for the last 10 years probably, because they are, my opinion, the best pizza delivery system. It's less about the pizza now. It's about their operation, about how they get things to you and how you can communicate with their consumers. So I am naturally attracted to people and brands who are constantly innovating, using technology, using marketing, using branding. Many of what Christopher Thomas Moore showed this morning were commercials, which really is what builds the brand. But it was really about the innovation.
But he came in at a struggling time there. I mean, he told me earlier that he came in 3 years after they had sort of the identity crisis. However, where he has driven their messaging, and it's interesting the words that he's using, not just the standard things like personalization and things which everybody wants,
right.
even coffee's getting into that,
right.
Putting ripple and putting the stuff on the top. But he started talking about, we had a conversation about AI and generative ordering and call centers and things. But what he said is the reason he didn't believe in robotics per se, even though he saw the robot we had making pizza at the show in New York, was because they believe that there is a personality of their staff in making the pizza, and a machine is not going to duplicate the personality. And caught me by surprise. I'm sitting there thinking, half of their locations they're not sit-down locations, and nobody knows who's making it, yet there's a personality,
right.
In making
right.
it. And the digital has to achieve the culture and the voice.
And I think that's why, and what makes me continue to, I think, be able to bring some of this content together, because I do know that piece of it from living I'm not a digital native. I'm a little bit older.
Do you order your shoes online?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure.
I do.
Okay.
I do. But I did not grow up in this digital explosion. I grew up on the traditional sides of marketing. But if you wanted to be successful, and if you wanted to really, if you have a passion for understanding a consumer and for trends and for setting those trends, you have to be curious, and you have to be willing to take some risks.
Right.
So I had a nickname when I was the chief marketing officer at Macy's.
What was that?
I was called a noble failure, because we would take some risks before QR codes, before people were scanning QR codes, to pull up menus in restaurants or pull up menus in hotels. We were doing it with fashion, except we were too ahead of the game. The technology really wasn't there yet.
And that's also where the pizza guys were.
And
they had to do their own, right?
Right. And so it became so fascinating for me that I just continued to surround myself with really good people like you, right, who were starting these industry, or starting this introduction of industries to each other, because we can all learn from each other. I had what I would call, I guess what Apple used to call their hackathons, where I would invite quarterly some technology people into my office and say, okay, tell me what's coming next. And obviously these were people, they were startups. They wanted to get in front of a chief marketing officer at Macy's to say, here, try my product and let's see how it works. So I tried it. 9 times out of 10, it didn't work. But we learned so much, and it advanced us into this next phase and this next phase. And it was why we were able to grow a very large digital e-commerce business at Macy's even prior to the pandemic.
So I want to recognize that obviously the National Retail Federation covers big and small, retailers and e-tailers. And, so that's I work with the National Restaurant Association. They have the same problem, right? You have the independents and the SMBs, and and people grow. And by the way, it's so easy to go international these days. So, since you're thinking ahead, I'm sure the next 6 to 12 months of content, not where we are today, because I'm sure we could use the word AI. Okay, great. But where do you think that the digital conversation is going to change a year from now at this conference or in January? I mean, I know you're not going to give me the program, but what are the subjects we're going to be talking about that are going to be showing above the booths and the rows? What's the headline, or where do you see the next set of trends going?
Yeah, look, if I had that crystal ball, we'd all be in a much better place.
Well, nobody invests in
today.
fats. You want the trends, but
Right.
there are certain areas you must have a gut feel.
I would say, and this is probably the most ubiquitous term too, it's the personalization. And so I think where CTM, Christopher Thomas More, was talking to you this morning about, people don't want a pizza made from a machine. It's people do want human touch, right? And with human touch, if you can't have that exact human touch, you can get the human touch through personalization in a digital way. And the more that you can personalize things and not just, again, it's a ubiquitous term and everybody uses it, but not everybody's really doing it because they have to know you. In order to really understand you, understand what your needs are, what you're looking for, they need to know you. Data is a way, and technology, those two things together, which is why generative AI is so incredibly interesting, right? Because as long as you've got good data, but you still need a human person to help sort of say, verify it, if you will. There are times they get it wrong, but eventually they'll get it right as long as it keeps going and going. So I think that personalization, that I think robotics is still something that is going to really become even bigger than it is today. I think people are still a little bit risk adverse. And so, they're just waiting.
It is. So Chris and I had this conversation about this, and I reminded him that never is like a really long time, and nobody ever thought they'd be eating a plant-based Whopper, and it would taste like a regular Whopper, right? So what we didn't get into was we were talking about robotics, and we were talking about how somebody has to, make the pizza in the dough and put things in the right place and get to know the people. And I agree with that. However, I do recall. So unfortunately, when you have deja vu and you've been around for a while, you see things and you think, I've seen that before. Yeah. I remember when Taco Bell 15 years ago came out with a robotic taco maker, but in order to give the human touch, it actually had a claw that picked up the cheese because they found out that machines generally clump the cheese when you make a burrito or whatever it is. It would pick it up and would actually drop it on. So I'm convinced that over time, that never's a long time, so I'll say 5 years or 10 years, that we will see the robotics and the personalization from that, the robotic personalization coming in there. But the actual empathy and understanding the customer and being able to respond is going to, and the creativity is going to take longer, which is why I predict that we will not be replaced by robots. However, there was something that's starting to emerge at NRF, and I see it at NAMA, which is the Merchandising Association, vending. The number of retailers, who would have thought I'd see a CVS in a retail machine, in a airport? Sure. Who would have thought I'd see Just Baked, or Wow Bao, doing food, fresh food, or freshly cooked food, or RoboBurger, right? And so the future of retailing also, when you look at this, is tied to new locations that may be unattended.
Yes.
And you guys are doing a lot in micro markets and things too.
Well, and I because I think, again, it all goes back to, and I can't believe I've been this long into this interview with you and I haven't mentioned this. It's all about the customer. In the end, it all goes back to the customer. So everything that we do, everything that I've ever done in my entire career, whether it was at Macy's or whether it's at the NRF, it's how do we best serve a customer? Because in the end, it's about that customer. So at the NRF, which is really more of a B2B organization, Macy's was clearly a B2C. I am a consumer marketer. I'm not a business marketer. But in the end, if I'm doing my job right, the business will then take the advice that the NRF has in the content.
Okay, but I just want to make sure I got something clear on this one. So if at the end, we all would agree the consumer drives everything, yes, right? So how does the NRF get the voice of the consumer at predicting what the trends would be? Or is it because of the councils of all the retailers? Or do you have a role also of helping them to see the way?
We do. It's both ways. And that's what I think is so different about the NRF versus some other trade associations, because it's the retailers giving us some information. It's us giving the retailer some information, and it's that collaboration that helps us really understand what's coming down next. What should we be looking for next? How do we put this content together? So I sit with, 10 other Christopher Thomas Moores and 20 other what I was at Macy's to say, okay, what are you seeing in your consumer? We now have just recently set up our Center for Retail Consumer Insights and Research. And it's so that we can help retailers understand where's the consumer going.
Well, you're the spokesperson of the industry as well.
Right. So it's that collaboration of the retailers and the NRF working together to actually put this content together.
And everyone is a customer. And you don't know where retail is going to be.
Exactly.
It's everywhere, actually.
It's everywhere.
So just sort of, I know we had some limited time here, but the nice thing about going outside the U.S. is you get to spend some time with people you would never get 2 seconds on the floor of the NRF show in New York, which maybe this year, since we now know each other, we may do that. But what is it that you came here? This is the first time doing this show. So was there something in walking the floor or talking to people here that you expected to see, but what maybe has surprised you here in technology you didn't expect to see?
Oh, that's such a good question that I didn't expect to see.
Is there something you walked along the floor and you're looking and say, wait a second, what's that about?
Well, it's a bit unfair because I was so aware of what was going to be on the floor for months now as the show was getting built. So nothing was really a surprise to me today. I'd still say the amount of technology that is another big ubiquitous term, right, is AI, but truly drilling down into AI and really taking the generative piece of it and helping everybody understand what that is. Because I just don't think
nobody understands what it is. And by the way, if you go ask AWS, and you go ask Google, and you go ask Meta to give you a definition, you're going to get a different definition from each one.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, look, you came from operations. At the end of the day, and people get tired of hearing me say this, I really do not want to use the term AI. I say actionable information. I've also heard the term actionable insights in here. At the end of the day, the retailers and consumers don't need to know what we're using there, but they want better service.
And it goes back to personalization. They want you. So this is just one big circle that just keeps coming back, right? They don't care. It's like I just said to you at the beginning, I don't need to know how to build the clock. I just want to be able to tell time.
Exactly.
The customer doesn't need to know how we do all of this. All they need is, I want my product.
And by the way, the retailer doesn't actually need to know either, what the surprise I get when I go to some of these shows, including the National Restaurant Show a few weeks ago, I only found one booth that actually had the word AI in it. Now, that's a little bit different here. There's a few, but I don't see it at the top, like when big data was out there and stuff. I don't see it at the top of every aisle. So what's happening is the technology providers here and other places are actually embedding it. They're saying, hey, we use this tool.
Because we shouldn't know about it. It shouldn't exist.
Exactly.
So
there we go.
There you go.
All right. So I'm going to be very interested to see, how the conversation goes and where the content, leads us, from the association's point of view and pulling it together because, it's just so difficult for people. But truly, for us, it's a pleasure to work with you guys because you do represent so many different facets.
We do.
And global. And there aren't a lot of groups that do that. And, it's just really there. And retailers are just, as restaurateurs, are, clearly in touch, with the consumer. So I want to thank you, for joining me, on a conversation, which I hope this will be.
Conversation.
I hope it'll be the first of a lot of conversations.
I would love to have more conversations.
If you like Starbucks, that's where you're going to find me for the conversation. Because half of these conversations come out at Starbucks. However, I never could figure out, is Starbucks a retailer or are they a restaurant company? They're both.
They're both.
They're both. And by the way, over here, go look at the food in the counter. They're a restaurant company here. where it's more limited. So anyway, I just find it interesting. I'm going to look forward to having the next conversation with you. So
Great.
Thank you for joining me.
Well, I'll have a conversation with you in January. How's that?
There you go. Well, that's a long time from now. We'll figure that out.
We'll do one before
There
then.
you go. So this podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of technology within the food and beverage industries, providing thought leadership as a single and impartial go-to resource. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology resource, an industry-wide professional education certification program. The bottom line, the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share, and do that with the NRF. So thank you for joining us on this episode of TechBytes powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to taking our next bite of technology together.